From the very beginning of Metal Gear Solid 4, Snake is dead. After a classic action hero outing, a tease, and a prequel, the fourth entry in the Metal Gear Solid series finally returns players back into the shoes of the legendary Solid Snake. But just like in Metal Gear Solid 2, there's a twist. Snake is no longer a hard-boiled badass who's too old for this shit, but now actually at the end of his natural life, falling apart in ways that no amount of action hero gruff can hide. And this change permeates everything, from Snake's presentation, to his motives, to his relationships with the supporting cast, in nuanced and interesting ways that only work because of the character's established legacy from the series' prior entries. Despite its prevalence in media, there's few works of art that feel like they're really dealing with the concept of death. And what makes Metal Gear Solid 4 so interesting, and what makes Old Snake my favorite Snake out of the bunch, is that he knows that he's dead from the start. A cutscene near the beginning of the game tells both Snake and the player that he has less than a year to live, effectively from old age, a condition not even defeating the bad guy and saving the world can fix. Instead of ending Snake's canonical story with Snake in the prime of his life, like most media, MGS4 shows us the inevitable fate of even the most badass heroes, a fate we know eventually awaits all of us, but that most fiction ignores by closing the curtains on their fictional worlds while their characters are still young and victorious. But having a character as established as Snake, a character we've seen grow and change across multiple entries, grappling with this fate provides a unique opportunity to explore an established character dealing with this aspect of life that all of us, if we're lucky, will one day have to confront. In his state, Snake is free from having to follow any of the classic tropes and arcs of a leading action role. We immediately know there'll be no heroic riding off into the sunset, not anymore, and even a dramatic sacrifice would fall flat given the proximity of Snake's inevitable fate. So instead of leaning into the classic reluctant hero archetype like in MGS1, Snake in MGS4 is surprisingly determined to get up and fight, despite his condition. He has no family or genes that can be passed on, his memes and ideals have already been passed on to the next generation in the form of Raiden, and with his lifespan, he has little to gain from any conflict now, so why does he choose to involve himself? It could be argued that Snake is just too familiar with life as a soldier to do anything else, but I don't think that this explanation fully addresses the determination we see Snake display in his final outing. Because Snake gets his ass kicked over and over again in this game. Snake is shown time and again to be obsolete, with high-tech cyborgs and nanomachines making even a clone of Big Boss look like just a leftover experiment past its prime. Raiden, Meryl, and Otacon, all supporting characters that looked up to and idolized Snake in prior games, now pay him sad glances and treat him like an old man, implicitly urging him to just retire and let them handle it. Instead of being treated like a legend, someone more than human, Snake is now faced with pity at every turn. Surely a stinging blow for someone who used to be known as the man who makes the impossible possible. Just like in real life, people don't stop existing as soon as their legacy is made concrete. Like the player, Meryl, Raiden, and Otacon saw and were inspired by the Snake that they first met, and had been carrying on with that past version of him in their minds, an image that is viscerally confronted by the state of the man they meet in MGS4, a reminder that even our aspirational figures are ultimately human, frail and temporary. And for Snake, he has to carry on despite this legacy, to continue living his life and fighting even as he comes to terms with the fact that he'll never again measure up to who he once was. Snake has to see Raiden, a fanboy rookie when they last met at the Big Shell, now outclassing him in every way, and still decide that there's something he can contribute, to believe through all the pain and suffering that there's still things that only he can do. Mirroring his physical degradation, Snake faces constant abuse throughout the story. At every turn he's outplayed, betrayed, and beaten. Nearly every act ends in failure, with Liquid always having the upper hand. Even at the end of the story, after a hard-fought victory, the game does everything it can to show us how alone Snake is. We get vignettes of all the characters moving on, patching up and forming new relationships that imply new, happier possibilities ahead. Each one a stinging reminder that Snake can't, that he has no future. We see the supporting cast celebrate Meryl's wedding, Snake conspicuously absent, forgotten, in the process of making the ultimate sacrifice even as his closest friends and allies are distracted with the chance at a new life now that the war is over. The scenario is almost absurd in its degradation of Snake. We watch Meryl, the love interest in MGS1, marrying the comic relief character from that game while Snake is alone, surrounded by the dead, preparing to end himself. But it's this degradation, combined with Snake's absurd determination, that makes him so much more of a heroic figure than in prior iterations. Snake effectively begins the game at 90, requiring biomechanical assistance just to move, with nothing to gain and less than a year to live, then throughout the game gets stabbed, burned, outclassed, defeated, humiliated, pitied, and beaten down in 1,000 different ways. But he still keeps fighting. And I think Snake's determination is shown to be not in spite of, but because he's a relic of an earlier time, that after passing on his will to the next generation through Otacon and Raiden, he is determined to end the conflicts of his past, to defeat the enemies and systems he spent his life fighting so that they don't go on to haunt the next generation. Before Big Boss admits in the epilogue that it was unfair to let his generation use Solid and Liquid as pawns in their war, Snake realizes that his conflict with Liquid and Ocelot is one that the next generation shouldn't have to spend their lives fighting and sacrificing for. I think this is why we see Snake become so determined and self-sacrificing with the end of his life approaching, why he is so insistent to be the one to suffer in the microwave tunnel, and why he's able to summon the strength to fight Liquid one last time even after the war is over. All this combines, in my opinion, to make Old Snake an even more compelling heroic figure. It's not the cool or composed heroics, the dramatic resistance against a torture machine or overcoming a squad of ridiculously named special forces. It's continuing to fight even when it's painful and undignified and there's every reason to give up. To continue fighting when you know you don't have a family or a future, when you know you have nothing to gain from it, purely out of a sense of duty, not to any country or totemic symbol, but for the people that will have to live with the consequences of your actions. This contrast to me is what makes Snake into a hero, the contrast of seeing someone's will break through even in their lowest and most pathetic moments. And by the end of the game, Snake is in a pathetic state, a heartbreaking state for someone we once knew as being so capable. We see him scarred, hooked up to oxygen, trying and totally failing to cut the tension with a joke. The characters that knew him in his prime reacting with a look of pain, the pain of seeing someone that they looked up to, that they once thought could do anything, in a powerless state we know they can't come back from. Like seeing a childhood hero afflicted with disability or disease or age, and having to come to terms with the fact that the figure we looked up to is never coming back. But seeing Snake in such a fatalistic position, conscious of his own sad state, makes it so much more meaningful when in the following scenes we see Snake crawling through the microwave tunnel, surrounded by images of those he's fighting to save, literally continuing forward on raw willpower even after his HP hits 0, because cool composure and snappy quips are only surface level. What really makes a hero is pressing on when your body is literally falling apart, even after you've already done your share, after every prior attempt to do something has failed, when even your closest allies have lost faith in you, when there's no reward except for doing what you think is right, and when every fiber in your body is burning, telling you to stop. But you keep putting one foot in front of the other, one arm in front of the next, and you keep going forward. And that's where this video originally ended, but I don't think that's the entirety of what the game is trying to communicate. Because if that was the case, the game would have ended with Snake's suicide, a final act of mind over matter, of selfless sacrifice for the new generation, clearing away the last remnants of the war, and finally ending the legacy of Foxhound and the Les Enfants Terribles project. But he doesn't, because I think the final message of MGS4 goes one step further. Snake's willingness to press on and sacrifice himself is heroic, but he deserves life too. Even if he only has months left to live, even if there's nothing left for him to do, there is still value in living out what's left of his life. The sins of one's generation are worth fighting against, but it doesn't mean that there's no value in life just because there's nothing more one can do. As Snake witnesses with Ava and Big Boss, the experiences and feelings one gathers through the course of their life is something entirely unique, something that is wholly lost to the world on their passing. Maybe some vague sense of it can be passed on, but it's only a fleeting glimpse. After all the prior entries' talk of passing on genes, memes, and politics, there's still something more that encompasses a person which can't be passed on or inherited, even with cloning or AI or information control. All the nuances of one's experiences, thoughts, feelings, perspectives, worldview, all the private moments and ideas that can't easily be communicated are lost forever when one dies. And because of that, beyond all the fighting and sacrificing, even when there's no battles to fight, nothing left that one can do, there's still value in the act of living, of being alive, even if just for a short while.
أخبروا